My name is Mitchell, a 32-year-old software engineer living modestly despite my wealthy family background. Nothing could have prepared me for the devastating car crash that took both my parents last month. Before I could even process my grief, my sister Sarah showed her true colors at the funeral. As relatives wept, she cornered me about the $12 million inheritance, demanding everything. If you are watching this from a family gathering, maybe look around and ask yourself, do you really know the people closest to you? Drop a comment about your own family dynamics and subscribe for what happened next. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, I never realized how privileged my life was. My father, Richard, was a successful entrepreneur who built a technology consulting firm from scratch after graduating from MIT. My mother, Laura, was a dedicated pediatrician who worked at Boston Children's Hospital. They provided everything for Sarah and me, never flaunting their wealth but ensuring we had the best education and opportunities. Our childhood home was warm and filled with laughter. Dad would take us camping in the summers, teaching us to fish and build fires. Mom would organize elaborate birthday parties, making each of us feel special. But even then, there were signs that something was not quite right with Sarah. Being 7 years older than me, Sarah always seemed to resent my presence. When I was born, she was no longer the sole focus of our parents' attention. According to family stories, she once tried to convince our babysitter to leave me at the park when I was just 2 years old. Our parents dismissed it as normal sibling jealousy, but looking back, it was the first red flag. As we grew up, the tension between us never really disappeared. Sarah would take my toys, blame me for things I did not do, and constantly remind me that as the firstborn, she deserved more. When I achieved something, like winning the state science fair in 6th grade, Sarah would find ways to diminish my accomplishments. She would say things like, "Dad paid for your project," or "the judges only picked you because they feel sorry for you." Sarah left for college when I was 11, and I remember feeling relieved. The house was peaceful without her constant negativity. She studied business administration, but never seemed to apply herself fully. She jumped from job to job, always claiming that her bosses were against her, or that the companies did not recognize her potential. At 26, Sarah met Jake Donovan, a smooth-talking investment broker who drove a flashy car and wore expensive suits. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding that our parents paid for entirely. Jake presented himself as extremely successful, but there were whispers among family friends about his financial troubles. I later learned that he had filed for bankruptcy twice before meeting my sister, a fact he carefully concealed from everyone. Sarah and Jake lived beyond their means, constantly asking our parents for financial help. Dad would often bail them out, against Mom's better judgment. I can still hear their arguments about it. Mom would say, "We are not helping them by enabling this behavior." Dad would reply, "She is still our daughter, Laura. We cannot let her struggle." Unlike Sarah, I was determined to make my own way. After graduating from college with a computer science degree, I refused financial assistance from my parents. I lived in a tiny apartment, took the bus to work, and slowly built my career at a software company. It was important for me to prove, mostly to myself, that I could succeed on my own merit. My parents respected my decision but still found small ways to help, like surprising me with groceries or taking me out to dinner. Dad would call regularly to check on me, always offering advice on my career or investments. Mom would send care packages with homemade cookies and notes saying how proud they were of me. What I admired most about my parents was their generosity beyond our family. Dad established scholarships for underprivileged students, and Mom volunteered at free clinics on weekends. They taught us that wealth came with responsibility to help others. Sarah seemed to miss that lesson entirely, viewing their charity work as money that should stay in the family. Despite the strain between Sarah and me, our parents never stopped trying to bring us closer. They would organize family vacations, holiday gatherings, and birthday celebrations, hoping to bridge the gap. For their sake, I would make an effort, engaging in polite conversation with Sarah and tolerating Jake's boastful stories about his latest business ventures. The last Christmas we spent together, just 3 months before the accident, was particularly tense. Jake announced that he was starting his own investment firm and hinted that he needed initial capital. Dad changed the subject, but the atmosphere remained awkward throughout dinner. Looking back, I wish I had appreciated that final holiday more, not knowing it would be our last together. My parents lived by the philosophy that family should always support each other, that blood ties were the most important connections in life. I wondered sometimes if their insistence on this belief, despite Sarah's behavior, was their greatest blind spot. They could not see that their daughter viewed them primarily as a financial resource rather than as parents to be cherished. The night that changed everything was unusually rainy for April. I was working late on a coding project when my phone rang just after 10. Seeing an unknown number, I almost did not answer. I wish I could have preserved those final moments of normalcy, the last few seconds of my life before everything shattered. Officer Brennan introduced himself, his voice grave. There had been an accident on Highway 20. A tractor trailer had jackknifed on the wet road, colliding with several vehicles. My parents were among the victims. They did not survive. The officer asked if I could come to the city morgue to identify them. The drive there remains a blur in my memory. Raindrops streaked across my windshield, mirroring the tears I could not yet shed. My mind refused to accept what had happened, clinging to denial as a temporary shield against the crushing reality. The morgue was clinical and cold, the fluorescent lights harsh against the sterile white walls. The medical examiner, a woman with kind eyes, led me to a room where 2 bodies lay covered with sheets. With gentle movements, she pulled back the coverings, revealing the peaceful faces of my parents. They looked like they were sleeping, except for the unnatural stillness and the slight discoloration that death brings. Something inside me broke at that moment, a dam giving way to overwhelming grief. After confirming their identities, I sat in the hallway, trying to gather myself enough to make the necessary calls. First on the list was Sarah. I dreaded talking to her, knowing how she would react. Her phone rang 5 times before she answered, her voice irritated at being disturbed so late. When I told her about the accident, there was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "What about their will?" Those were her first words, not an expression of grief or disbelief, but a cold calculation of what our parents' death meant financially. I hung up without answering, disgusted and heartbroken anew. Planning the funeral fell mainly to me. Sarah flew in 2 days later with Jake, immediately questioning the funeral arrangements I had made. The caskets were too expensive, she argued. The service did not need to be so elaborate. Every decision became a battle, with Sarah constantly mentioning how much of their inheritance we were spending on the send-off. The day of the funeral dawned bright and clear, a cruel contrast to the darkness I felt inside. The church was filled with people whose lives my parents had touched, colleagues, patients, friends, and neighbors. Many shared stories about my parents' generosity and kindness, each word a bittersweet reminder of the extraordinary people we had lost. Sarah and Jake sat in the front row beside me, their faces arranged in appropriate expressions of sorrow. But I noticed how Sarah kept checking her watch, how Jake scanned the crowd as if networking at a business event. During the eulogy, which I delivered through tears, neither of them seemed moved. They were going through the motions, playing the part of grieving daughter and son-in-law. At the reception afterward, I spotted Sarah in an intense conversation with our family lawyer, Frank Wilson. She was gesturing emphatically, her face flushed with what looked like anger. Frank seemed uncomfortable, shaking his head and trying to move away. When she saw me watching, Sarah plastered on a smile and rejoined Jake, who was charming the widow of Dad's business partner. As people offered condolences and shared memories, I felt increasingly isolated in my genuine grief. Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister, hugged me tightly and whispered, "Your parents were so proud of the man you have become, Mitchell. Be strong now." Something in her tone suggested she understood what I was dealing with regarding Sarah. By the end of that long, exhausting day, a sense of foreboding had settled over me. The worst had already happened, I thought, with the loss of my parents. I had no idea that another kind of tragedy was about to unfold, one that would test the limits of family bonds and reveal the true character of the people closest to me. 1 week after the funeral, Frank Wilson called to arrange the reading of the will. His office was located in a historic building in downtown Boston, with dark wood paneling and leather-bound law books lining the walls. As Sarah, Jake, and I settled into the comfortable chairs facing Frank's desk, the tension in the room was palpable. Frank, a tall man in his 60s who had been my father's friend since college, adjusted his glasses and began with a solemn expression. Before I read the legal details, I want to say that Richard and Laura were two of the finest people I have ever known. Their loss is a tragedy beyond words. Sarah nodded impatiently. Yes, they were wonderful. Can we get to the important part now? Frank gave her a disapproving look before opening the document folder. The will was straightforward. After some specific bequests to charities, the bulk of the estate, valued at approximately $12 million, was to be divided equally between Sarah and me. This included their home, investment portfolios, and Richard's majority stake in his company. I felt a wave of shock. $12 million. I knew my parents were well off, but I had no idea the estate was worth that much. They had always lived relatively modestly, reinvesting in Dad's business and donating generously to causes they believed in. While I was still processing this information, Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This cannot be right. Dad promised me the majority of the estate. He knew Jake, and I needed it for our business ventures. Frank looked confused. I assure you, Sarah, this is the will your parents signed just last year. I drafted it myself, according to their explicit instructions. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Then explain this. She thrust it at Frank. It is a letter from Dad, written 3 months ago, saying he intended to leave 75% to me and only 25% to Mitchell. Frank examined the letter, his brow furrowing. The handwriting looked similar to Richard's, but there were inconsistencies. More importantly, this does not constitute a legal amendment to the will. If your father wanted to change the distribution, he would have contacted me to draft a new will or a codicil. Jake jumped in, his voice smooth but with an undercurrent of aggression. Are you suggesting the letter is fake? That Sarah is lying. Frank remained professional. I am simply stating that this letter has no legal bearing on the will as it stands. The distribution remains 50-50 as your parents intended. Sarah's face contorted with rage. You were always on Mitchell's side. I bet he got to you somehow, convinced you to alter the will after they died. My father would never have left half to someone who abandoned the family business to play with computers. I was stunned by the accusation. Abandoned? I never abandoned anything. I chose a different career path, and Mom and Dad supported that decision. Sarah laughed bitterly. Of course they said they supported you. They felt sorry for you, their underachieving son who could never measure up to the family legacy. Frank intervened. This is neither the time nor place for such discussions. The will is legal and binding. Each of you will receive approximately $6 million once the estate is settled, which should take about 3 months. Sarah grabbed her purse and stood. This is not over. I will contest the will. I will prove that this is not what our father wanted. She turned to me, her eyes cold. You may have fooled everyone with your modest act, Mitchell, but I know the truth. You manipulated our parents just like you manipulate everyone. With that, she stormed out, Jake following after throwing me a smug look. The door slammed behind them, leaving Frank and me in stunned silence. I am sorry about that, Mitchell, Frank said finally. I knew Sarah might be disappointed, but I did not expect such an extreme reaction. I stared at my hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Did she ever mention Dad changing his will to you? Did he ever indicate he wanted to give her more? Frank shook his head. Never. In fact, when we last reviewed their estate plan, Richard specifically mentioned wanting to ensure an equal distribution between you two, regardless of your different choices in life. He was proud of both his children, Mitchell. As I left Frank's office, I felt a profound sense of betrayal. The sister who should have been my ally in grief had become my adversary, all because of money. The inheritance that represented our parents' hard work and love had become a weapon that threatened to destroy what little family I had left. That evening, I received an email from a lawyer named Thomas Green, informing me that he had been retained by Sarah to contest the will on grounds of undue influence and possible forgery. The battle lines were drawn, and I realized with a sinking heart that losing my parents was only the beginning of my ordeal. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Jake launched what could only be described as a character assassination campaign against me. Relatives I had not spoken to in years suddenly called or emailed, their messages tinged with suspicion. Did I really manipulate our parents? Was it true that I had threatened to cut them off from their only grandson unless they changed their will? The allegations were not only false but absurd, considering I was not even married and had no children. My Aunt Patricia called me in tears one evening. "Sarah told the entire family that you stole money from your father's company over the years," she said. "She claims you have millions hidden away already." I do not believe her for a second, but others are wondering. The damage to my reputation was just the beginning. Thomas Green, Sarah's shark of a lawyer, began sending aggressive letters demanding access to my financial records going back 10 years. He claimed they were gathering evidence of my financial manipulation of our parents. Each letter felt like a physical blow, another attack on the relationship I had cherished with Mom and Dad. One rainy Tuesday, Frank called with disturbing news. "Mitchell, we have discovered something concerning. It appears that someone accessed your parents' bank accounts online 3 days after the accident, before the accounts were frozen as part of the estate process. The bank's security system flagged it as suspicious." "Was it Sarah?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Frank sighed. The login came from an IP address associated with Sarah and Jake's home network. They did not manage to transfer any funds, but they tried to access your parents' investment accounts as well. This revelation was followed by another piece of the puzzle. Through a mutual friend in the finance industry, I learned that Jake's latest business venture had collapsed spectacularly just 1 month before the accident. He had borrowed heavily from predatory lenders, using their house as collateral. Sarah and Jake were not just greedy, they were desperate. Frank arranged a mediation session, hoping to resolve the conflict without a prolonged legal battle that would drain the estate. Sarah arrived with both Jake and Thomas Green, her face set in determination. I came alone, still hoping for reconciliation despite everything. The mediator, a retired judge, explained the process and then invited Sarah to state her position. She did not hold back. "Our father built a business empire from nothing," she began. Mitchell turned his back on that legacy, refusing to join the company and pursuing his own selfish interests. Dad understood the importance of keeping the business in the family. He told me multiple times that he intended to leave the majority of his estate to me because I would preserve his legacy. This will is a mistake, or worse, the result of Mitchell's manipulation during our parents' final months. When my turn came, I spoke from the heart. Our parents were fair people who loved both their children equally. They respected our different paths in life. The equal distribution reflects their values and their hopes for both of us. I have never asked them for money, never tried to influence their decisions about the estate. The mediation deteriorated quickly. Sarah refused to budge from her position, that she deserved the entire $12 million. The mediator eventually concluded that we had reached an impasse. As we prepared to leave, Sarah turned to me with a look of pure disdain. "You do not deserve a penny of their money. You have no idea the sacrifices I made to stay close to them, to be the dutiful daughter. Where were you when Dad needed help with the business? Where were you when Mom was sick 2 years ago? Off living your separate life, barely bothering to call." Her words stung because they contained a grain of truth. I had moved away, focused on building my own career. Though I visited regularly and called at least weekly, had I been as present as I should have been. The climax of our conflict came 3 days later. I was at home trying to distract myself with work when my doorbell rang insistently. Through the peephole, I saw Sarah and Jake standing on my porch, both looking agitated. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Before I could speak, Sarah pushed past me into the living room, Jake following close behind. "We need to talk, little brother," Sarah said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I have spent my entire life watching you get special treatment. The golden boy who could do no wrong, who got away with everything while I was held to impossible standards." I tried to interrupt, to point out how distorted her view was, but she continued her tirade. "Do you know what Dad said to me when I asked for help with Jake's business? He said he needed to think about it, that he wanted to make sure it was a sound investment. Yet he paid for your entire college education without question, bought you a car for graduation, supported every whim you ever had." Jake joined in, pointing an accusing finger at me. "You have no idea what we are going through. We have debt, real responsibilities. This inheritance is our chance to finally get ahead, to build something significant. What do you need it for? Your pathetic programming job and empty apartment." The verbal assault continued for nearly 20 minutes. They belittled my career, my life choices, even my relationship with our parents. With each word, I felt something breaking inside me, the last remnants of familial love giving way to a cold realization. This person, my only sibling, did not care about me at all. The money meant more to her than our relationship. Finally, exhausted by their attacks and heartbroken by the truth they revealed, I made a decision that would change everything. "Take it," I said quietly. Sarah stopped mid-sentence. "What did you say?" "Take the money. All of it. I will sign whatever you need me to sign." I gave Frank permission to redraft the agreement to give you the full inheritance. Sarah's expression shifted from anger to suspicion, then to triumph. "Just like that? What is the catch?" "Only one condition," I said, meeting her gaze steadily. "Once this is done, we are done. No more contact, no more family obligations. You get the money, but you lose me as your brother forever." Jake laughed. "That is your condition. We never have to deal with you again." "That sounds like a bonus, not a sacrifice." Sarah studied my face for a moment, perhaps searching for signs of a trick or trap. Finding none, a slow, satisfied smile spread across her features. "Perfect," she said. As they left my apartment, I felt a strange mixture of loss and relief. I had just voluntarily given up $6 million and my only remaining family tie. Yet somehow I felt lighter. No amount of money was worth the toxicity Sarah brought into my life. I would rather be poor and at peace than wealthy and constantly at war. The next day, I signed the papers Frank reluctantly prepared, officially renouncing my claim to the inheritance. As I put down the pen, I wondered if my parents would understand my decision, or if they would be disappointed that I had given up so easily. Either way, it was done. Sarah had what she wanted, and I was alone. The weeks following my decision passed in a blur of emptiness and second-guessing. I threw myself into work, often staying at the office until midnight, coding until my vision blurred. Anything to avoid returning to my quiet apartment where thoughts of my parents and the family I had lost would overwhelm me. My colleagues noticed the change in me. The easygoing Mitchell who brought donuts on Fridays and organized office happy hours had been replaced by a quiet, intense version who barely spoke, except about work-related matters. Most gave me space, attributing my behavior to grief, which was partially true. Adam, a senior developer I had worked with on several projects, was the exception. One evening, as I was preparing for another late night, he stopped by my desk. "This cannot continue, Mitchell," he said simply. "You are burning yourself out, and frankly, your code is starting to show it. I found 3 bugs in your last commit." I started to defend myself, but Adam raised a hand. "No excuses. You are coming to dinner at my place tonight. My wife makes a lasagna that will change your life, and you look like you have not had a home-cooked meal in weeks." Too exhausted to argue, I agreed. That dinner became a turning point. Adam and his wife Lisa created a warm, welcoming environment where, for the first time since my parents' death, I felt comfortable enough to open up. Over a second helping of indeed life-changing lasagna, I told them everything: the accident, Sarah's betrayal, my decision to walk away from the inheritance. I expected judgment, maybe even confusion about why I would give up such a large sum. Instead, Adam nodded thoughtfully. "Money reveals character," he said. "It does not create it." Lisa reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Your parents raised you with values that cannot be measured in dollars. That is the real inheritance, and Sarah cannot take it from you." Their perspective helped me begin to see my situation differently. Yes, I had lost my parents and my sister, and yes, I had walked away from a fortune. But I still had my integrity, my skills, and the potential to build a new life on my own terms. With gentle persistence, Adam and Lisa drew me out of my self-imposed isolation. They invited me to dinners, introduced me to their friends, and eventually convinced me to try volunteering at a youth center where Lisa taught art classes on weekends. The center served teenagers from disadvantaged backgrounds, providing a safe space for homework help, creative activities, and mentorship. My first day there, I was assigned to help with the computer lab, assisting kids who were learning basic programming. The genuine curiosity and enthusiasm of these teenagers reminded me why I had fallen in love with coding in the first place. It was at the center that I met Jessica, a compassionate social worker with a quick wit and an infectious laugh. She coordinated the center's programs and seemed to know every kid by name, along with their individual challenges and dreams. After catching me looking overwhelmed by a particularly rowdy group of 14-year-olds, Jessica came to my rescue. Showing remarkable patience and understanding, she helped me connect with the teens on their level. Later, she explained her approach. "Most of these kids have adults in their lives who have let them down," she said. "Consistency and genuine interest matter more than anything else you can offer them." Over coffee breaks and lunch hours, Jessica and I gradually shared our stories. When I finally told her about Sarah and the inheritance situation, her reaction surprised me. "I understand your sister more than you might think," she admitted. "My older brother and I had a similar dynamic. He was the rebellious one, I was the rule follower. Our parents, especially our dad, were harder on him. I always felt like the favorite, which created a wedge between us." "How did you resolve it?" I asked, curious about her insight. Jessica smiled sadly. "We have not completely. But I realized something important when our mom got sick a few years ago. The relationships that matter most are worth fighting for, even when they are difficult. My brother and I still disagree on many things, but we are trying." Her perspective made me question my decision to cut Sarah off completely. Had I given up too easily? Then again, my situation with Sarah went beyond normal sibling rivalry. Her actions had been deliberately hurtful and manipulative. As weeks turned into months, I found a new rhythm to my life. Work became enjoyable again, rather than just an escape. I spent 2 evenings a week at the youth center, plus occasional weekend activities. Jessica and I developed a friendship that hinted at the potential for something more, though neither of us rushed to define it. Meanwhile, through social media and mutual acquaintances, I heard about Sarah and Jake's extravagant spending spree. They purchased a mansion in an exclusive neighborhood, 2 luxury cars, and took a 3-week vacation to private islands in the Caribbean. Each update reinforced that I had made the right decision. They were burning through the inheritance with no thought of investment or the future. I tried not to care, to remind myself that their choices were no longer my concern. Yet sometimes late at night, I would find myself wondering what our parents would think of how their hard-earned money was being spent. Not on education or charity or even sound business investments, but on status symbols and fleeting experiences. 3 months after signing away my inheritance, I received an unexpected call from an unfamiliar number. Assuming it was a telemarketer, I almost did not answer. When I did, the familiar voice of Frank Wilson greeted me, somber and urgent. "Mitchell, we need to talk." Something has happened. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? His tone sent a chill through me. Whatever this was, it was serious. I agreed to the meeting and spent a restless night wondering what new complication had arisen in what I thought was a closed chapter of my life. Frank's office felt colder than I remembered, though perhaps it was just my apprehension. He greeted me with a firm handshake and ushered me to the same chair I had sat in months earlier when this ordeal began. "Thank you for coming, Mitchell. I would not have called if it was not important." He removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture that conveyed fatigue and stress. "There has been a significant development regarding your parents' estate." Frank explained that the Securities and Exchange Commission had launched an investigation into my father's company 3 weeks before the accident. An anonymous whistleblower had alleged financial irregularities, specifically related to overstated assets and hidden liabilities. While my father was not personally implicated in any wrongdoing, as the majority shareholder and CEO, he would have faced intense scrutiny. The investigation was temporarily suspended after his death, but resumed with new vigor when large amounts of money began moving out of the company's accounts, transfers initiated by Sarah as the new majority shareholder. The truth is, Mitchell, your father's company was not as financially solid as everyone believed. He had leveraged many of his assets to secure loans for expansion just before the market downturn. When auditors examined the books more closely, they discovered that the company's valuation was significantly inflated. I struggled to process what Frank was telling me. "Are you saying my father was involved in something illegal?" Frank shook his head quickly. "No, nothing illegal, but perhaps overly optimistic business practices. The $12 million estate was largely based on the company's estimated value. The actual liquid assets, cash, and securities amount to less than $2 million. The rest was the perceived value of the business, which the SEC investigation has now called into question." The implications slowly dawned on me. "So the inheritance is worth a fraction of what we thought," Frank confirmed. "And most of those assets are currently frozen pending the investigation's outcome. Sarah has been informed, but I wanted to tell you personally, given everything that has happened." A strange sensation washed over me, not quite satisfaction, but something close to vindication. "What about all the money Sarah and Jake have been spending? The house, the cars?" Frank's expression was grim. "They financed everything based on the expected inheritance. They made down payments and took out loans, believing they would pay it all off when the estate settled. Now they are facing a financial catastrophe of their own making." I sat back, trying to absorb the magnitude of what had happened. Had my parents known about the company's precarious position? Was that why they never flaunted their wealth? Had my father been working to fix the situation when the accident occurred? How did Sarah take the news? I finally asked. "Not well," Frank said, with significant understatement. "She accused me of incompetence, threatened more lawsuits, and refused to accept the reality of the situation. Jake was even worse. He stormed out, saying he needed to make some calls." Over the next few days, the full extent of Sarah and Jake's predicament became clear through news reports and industry gossip. Jake had leveraged everything on the promised inheritance, borrowing from increasingly dubious sources. When word spread that the $12 million might never materialize, creditors began circling. A week after my meeting with Frank, Adam showed me a business news article on his phone. Jake had fled the country, allegedly to avoid both creditors and potentially criminal charges for financial fraud related to his investment business. He had emptied their joint accounts before disappearing, leaving Sarah to face the consequences alone. The mansion was the first thing to go, seized by the bank when payments were missed. The luxury cars followed. Sarah was forced to move into a small apartment, a dramatic fall from the lavish lifestyle she had briefly enjoyed. According to mutual friends, she was now working as a retail sales associate, the only job she could find quickly. I felt no joy in her downfall, only a profound sadness at how money had corrupted and ultimately destroyed both my sister and what remained of our family. I tried to focus on my own life, on the positive changes I had made since walking away from the inheritance. Jessica and I had started dating officially, and my work with the teenagers at the center had become one of the most rewarding parts of my week. Then one rainy evening, almost mirror imaging the night I received the call about my parents, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a bedraggled figure, hair plastered to her head from the downpour. It took me a moment to recognize Sarah. So different did she look from the polished, confident woman who had demanded my inheritance. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. Our last interaction had ended with a promise to never contact each other again. Opening this door would mean stepping back into a relationship that had caused me nothing but pain. Yet something, perhaps my parents' voices in my memory, urged me to turn the handle. Sarah looked up, her makeup streaked by rain or tears or both. "I did not know where else to go," she said, her voice barely audible above the storm. I stepped aside to let her in, watching as she dripped onto my entryway floor. The silence between us stretched uncomfortably until she spoke again. "Jake is gone. He took everything we had left and disappeared. The investigation into Dad's company has frozen all the remaining assets. I have nothing." Her voice broke on the last word. I should have felt vindicated. This was karma in its purest form, the consequences of her own actions returning to her in perfect measure. Instead, I felt a complex mix of emotions, pity, lingering anger, and a strange sense of responsibility that I could not quite shake. "Why come to me?" I asked, keeping my distance. "You made it clear that money was more important to you than our relationship." Sarah looked around my modest apartment, taking in the simple furniture, the lack of luxury items, the framed photo of our parents on the bookshelf. "Because you are the only person who might understand. We lost the same parents. We grew up in the same house." I laughed bitterly. "We might have grown up in the same house, but we lived in different worlds. You saw Mom and Dad as a source of money and status. I saw them as people to learn from and love." Sarah collapsed onto my couch, her posture defeated in a way I had never seen before. "You were always their favorite," she said quietly. "From the day you were born. Dad's little genius, Mom's sensitive boy. Do you know what it is like to always be second best in your parents' eyes?" "That is not true," I countered. "They loved us equally. They were proud of both of us." Sarah shook her head, tears flowing freely now. "They were harder on me. They expected more, criticized more. When you got B's, they celebrated. When I got B's, they asked why they were not A's. When you decided not to join the family business, they respected your independence. When I made mistakes, they reminded me of my responsibilities." For the first time, I glimpsed Sarah's reality, so different from my own perception of our childhood. Had our parents unconsciously favored me? Had they held Sarah to a higher standard? I still did not believe it justified her actions, but it helped me understand them better. The conversation that followed was the most honest one we had ever had. Sarah admitted to years of resentment and jealousy that had poisoned her relationship not just with me, but with our parents as well. I acknowledged that I had been oblivious to her struggles, focused on my own path and assuming her confidence meant she did not need support. "I was awful to you," Sarah finally said. "After they died, after the will reading, I let greed and bitterness consume me. Jake encouraged it, said we deserved the money more than you did, but I was a willing participant. I thought having all that money would finally make me feel secure, worthy. Instead, I lost everything, including my brother." The raw vulnerability in her voice reached a part of me I thought had hardened against her. She was still my sister, still the person who had taught me to ride a bike, who had defended me against bullies in elementary school before our relationship soured. Before the money came between us. "I am not giving you money," I said firmly, wanting to be clear. "I cannot fix your financial situation." Sarah nodded. "I know. I would not ask that of you, not after everything. I do not know what to do next. How to start over. How to live with the mistakes I have made." In that moment, I made a decision that would change both our lives again. I could not give her money, but I could offer something else, a chance at redemption, a path forward, the opportunity to rebuild not just her life, but perhaps, in time, our relationship as well. My offer to Sarah was simple, but not easy. I helped her find a temporary place to stay, a small room in an apartment shared by one of my coworkers who needed extra rent money. More importantly, I used my contacts to get her an interview for an administrative position at the tech company where I worked. The pay was modest, the work unglamorous, but it was a start, a foundation upon which she could rebuild. Sarah accepted with a humility I had never seen in her before. The first few weeks were rocky. She had to adjust to a 9-to-5 schedule, to taking directions rather than giving them, to counting pennies when grocery shopping. More than once, she called me in tears, ready to give up. Each time, I reminded her that our parents had built their success from nothing, with persistence and integrity. She could do the same. Jessica was skeptical when I told her about helping Sarah. After everything she did, you are giving her another chance. She asked, concern evident in her voice. What if she betrays you again? I understood her caution, but something felt right about my decision. If I had walked away, left Sarah to face the consequences alone, would I have been any better than she was when she chose money over family? Two wrongs do not make a right, and perpetuating a cycle of hurt would not honor my parents' memory. Slowly, Jessica came around. She even offered to meet Sarah, an olive branch that surprised and touched me. Their first interaction was awkward, both women measuring each other carefully. But over time, as they saw each other at occasional dinners or community events, a cautious respect developed. The true test came when Sarah received her first performance review at work, along with a small bonus. Instead of spending it on herself, she asked if she could contribute to the youth center's computer lab fund. It was a modest amount, but the gesture spoke volumes about her changing priorities. As months passed, I saw glimpses of the sister I remembered from our earliest childhood, before jealousy and competition had taken root. Sarah worked hard, lived modestly, and gradually paid off her most pressing debts. Jake remained gone, eventually serving divorce papers from somewhere in South America. Sarah signed them without hesitation, closing that chapter of her life. 6 months after Sarah showed up at my door, we made a pilgrimage together to our parents' grave. It was the first time she had visited since the funeral. The autumn leaves crunched beneath our feet as we approached the shared headstone, elegant but not ostentatious, just as they would have wanted. We stood in silence for several minutes, lost in our own thoughts and memories. Then Sarah spoke softly. I never really grieved them. I was so focused on the money, on what I thought I deserved, that I never allowed myself to feel the loss. She knelt and placed a small bouquet of Mom's favorite flowers, daisies, at the base of the stone. I am sorry, she whispered, and I knew she was speaking not just to our parents but to me as well. That day marked a new beginning for us, not a return to what was, but the creation of something different. We would never be the carefree siblings of our earliest years. Too much had happened between us. The trust that had been broken would take years to fully rebuild, if it ever could be. But we were family, the only immediate family either of us had left, and that counted for something. Jessica and I continued dating, our relationship deepening as we shared more of our lives with each other. Her work at the youth center expanded, and I took on additional responsibilities there too, finding purpose in mentoring teenagers who reminded me of myself at that age, full of potential and uncertainty. Sarah eventually moved into her own apartment, small but entirely hers. She started taking night classes in accounting, discovering an aptitude for numbers that had been overshadowed by her previous focus on status and appearances. We had dinner together once a month, a tradition we established to stay connected without forcing a closeness that might feel artificial. The irony was not lost on me that by walking away from the inheritance, I had gained something far more valuable: personal growth, authentic relationships, and eventually a reconciliation I had thought impossible. Sarah, by grasping desperately for wealth, had lost everything before finding her way to a more genuine life. One evening, as Jessica and I walked home from a movie, she asked a question that made me pause. Do you ever regret giving up your portion of the inheritance? Even knowing what happened later, that would have still been around $1 million. I considered her question carefully. The money would have made certain things easier, certainly. I could have bought a house instead of renting, traveled more, started my own company perhaps. But those material advantages seemed insignificant compared to what I had learned about myself and about life through this experience. I think my parents' real legacy was not the money they earned, but the values they lived by, I answered. Honesty, hard work, compassion for others. In choosing those values over the inheritance, I honored them more truly than I would have by taking the money. Jessica squeezed my hand. I think they would be incredibly proud of you. And of Sarah, too, for finding her way back. The journey from that rainy night when I learned of my parents' death to where I stand now has been filled with unexpected turns, profound loss, and surprising grace. Money did not create the problems in our family, but it revealed the character within each of us, for better and worse. The $12 million inheritance that once seemed so important has faded in significance compared to the lessons it taught us. Sarah and I will never have the effortless closeness that some siblings enjoy. Our relationship requires work, forgiveness, and continuous choice to move forward rather than dwell in past hurts. But there is beauty in that effort, in the conscious decision to be family despite everything. Sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to discover what you had all along. As for my sister and me, we are building something new from the ashes of what we lost. It is not perfect, but it is ours, and somehow I think Mom and Dad would be proud. I hope this story resonates with some of you out there. Have you ever experienced how money can change relationships or reveal someone's true character? Or maybe you have a story of reconciliation against all odds. Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story touched you in any way, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of family, loss, and redemption. And if you know someone struggling with family conflict, perhaps sharing this might give them hope that even the deepest wounds can heal with time and effort. Thank you for listening to my journey.